Hello everyone! With PAX Australia happening this week, I wanted to chat about a few games that I enjoy from a publisher who will be attending this weekend and you can check out while you're at the convention. And even if you're not going to the convention, then these games should definitely be on your radar because I think they're extremely worthwhile. So today I'm going to be talking about 4 games from my beloved Devolver Digital that I think that you should definitely check out. So let's jump straight into it. The first game that I'm going to chat to you about is the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood by Spanish devs Deconstructing. This game came out a few weeks ago and I was so keen to play it, but I was still deep in my Baldur's Gate 3 hole. So it took me a second to play this and wow, was it a great game. The Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood is set in a future where Earth is largely abandoned by humanity in favor of colonizing other parts of space. Women have gained the ability to ascend and become witches, immortal beings that live in space and use their magic in their own unique ways. We follow a witch named Fortuna who had her tarot deck confiscated and was exiled from her coven for 1,000 years to meditate on her powers after predicting her coven's demise. When we enter the story, Fortuna has served 200 years of her sentence and is absolutely at her wit's end. Desperate to alter the monotony of her situation, she summons a forbidden entity called a behemoth to help her escape. Together they begin forging a brand new kind of deck, which is much more powerful. Using the power of the deck, Fortuna begins to get a bit more freedom, which allows her to reunite with some of her old friends and meet some new ones. She reads their fortunes with her deck, shaping the fates and advancing their stories. The main things that you do in a day within this game are making your new deck and giving readings to visitors. The card customization itself is mostly just aesthetic, but there is some strategy to it in that what you select as a template will ultimately determine what the card's meanings are. The meanings are rather broad, and I pretty much always got the result that I wanted to each time that I did an actual reading. So don't stress too much about whether or not you've picked the right elements to put into a card. I think you just want to make something that you find aesthetically pleasing at the end of the day. It's kind of nice because that's a kind of foolproof mechanic. So even if you're a little dummy like me, there's always hope. Do not stress. The card making is definitely busy work between giving you the meat and potatoes of the game, which is definitely the story. I won't be giving away too much about the ins and outs of the story because if I'm being very honest, I am begging you to play this game because I want to talk to people about it. Overall, I really enjoyed this game. There's one part in particular that made me absolutely bawl my eyes out, which was a story about a new witch who was learning about their gender. Once ascending to become a witch, all of the other witches were calling her a woman, using she, her pronouns. It took her a while to grapple with the idea of that identity because she was so bogged down with all of the negativity and depression that was holding her back in her mortal life that it was making her ascension to becoming a witch stifled. She sits down with Fortuna to have a tarot reading or a card reading. And through the reading and a tea ceremony, we helped her find herself, and she was so beautiful and confident, and it made me so emotional. She was so sure of herself and sure of her personality. I was just crying and crying. This story was so impactful, and there are a lot of moments like this within the game. It was really unexpected, and I wonder, based on the conversation that you have with her, what kind of outcomes there are for the conversation. But for me, she was the peppermancer, and she was brilliant. My only criticism about this game is something I'm very passionate about, and that's romance. All of a sudden, a romance was thrust upon me, and I don't know if it was something that I said earlier to trigger it in that part of the game, but they definitely weren't my first choice, and I also couldn't get out of it. It was cute, but because there was no leading up to it, for a lot of it I felt like I was floundering through the romance. People were telling each other they loved each other from just having met maybe once or twice, and I don't know if I just don't understand human interaction, but it definitely came out of left field for me. It was cute, but I feel like we honestly could have done without the romance in this game. Shock horror coming from me, especially because we're kind of introduced to this character knowing that she either doesn't like romance at all or is extremely picky with who she wants to romance. So I would say she sits somewhere on the asexual spectrum aromantic spectrum to demisexual, demi-romantic. Like that's how I see the main character. So when they thrust a relationship on her with not a lot going on prior, it does feel a bit weird. But that's such a small critique. That's just something that is part of the game, but yeah, it doesn't make a huge impact on the game. I'd also like to say that overall, I actually didn't love the ending. And I'm not going to spoil what the ending is at all, but I do want to say that just because I didn't like the ending didn't take away how much I enjoyed the rest of the game. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt. Overall, the game was incredible. It reminded me of Coffee Talk, which I've never played before, but it had a similar vibe from what I've seen of the game. So let me know if you've played both of these games, whether you think that that's an accurate comparison. Alrighty, on to the next game. I think you all knew this one was coming. I absolutely adored this game. Cult of the Lamb has you acting as a wolf in sheep's clothing as a newly resurrected cult leader doing the bidding of an imprisoned deity called the One Who Waits. Now it's up to you to free your master by recruiting new followers to the flock, building a base for them to live in, and going on bloody crusades against the otherworldly entities that trapped him. That loop of gathering supplies and tending to your worshippers, upgrading both your character and your homestead, and then going out and doing it all again. Cult of the Lamb's main mechanic is the roguelike dungeon crawler aspect of the game that randomizes level layouts and the items that you come across each run as you become progressively more powerful. Each crusade is randomized and repeatable. You even pick between one of 4 disconnected areas to fight through at the start of every run, with a boss waiting to be beaten at the end of each one in order to complete the story, meaning that you aren't necessarily able to see how far you can make it like in other roguelike games such as Hades or Rogue Legacy, which the game is often compared to. I definitely wouldn't say that this is necessarily a bad thing, and specifically for people like me, the largely predictable kind of experience I'll have in each encounter helps me justify doing the actions to get the supplies that I need for the other part of this game, managing your flock. Converting flock that you find out on crusades lets you put them to work by gathering resources like wood and stone, worshipping your visage to generate resources such as devotion, or cleaning up poop that they generously bless the edges of your camp with. You'll be doing a lot of work yourself to start, but it is incredibly satisfying to watch your base grow as you recruit more and more followers. Your base and your lamb each have tech trees to work up, unlocking either new structures to build or new abilities and weapons to find respectively. That means that watering your farms by hand can eventually be handled by your recruits, and more interesting options gradually open up that let you send your followers off on expeditions for resources, or even temporarily turn themselves into demons that can assist you in battle. I think my favourite part of this game is the Twitch interactivity that they implemented. When I was still streaming regularly, I played this with my viewers who could actually put themselves into the game as my cultists. I would defeat bosses or find one of the followers along the path, and then when I came back to the base, my chat could roll to see who got to embody the new member and design them to suit themselves best, and it made it really feel like I was actively looking after my community. Cult of the Lamb is as adorable as it is unnerving. It is an eclectic mix of genres and themes that work cohesively. Its combat is immensely satisfying, and building my very own cult base and tending to a flock of followers was just as fun as any swing of the axe. Cult of the Lamb is something altogether different, and I had an absolute blast playing it. Now on to the next one. Most recently I finished playing Gumbrella last week, and it was such a fun little game. I just had to talk about it. I received this game as a preview before its release, and I was really impressed by it. I've had some interesting experiences with platformers in the past, mainly because I'm just not that good at them, but I persevered, and because of my dedication to finishing, I had to include it in today's recommendations. The story is simple. You're a woodsman on a mission. Something was taken from you, and you need to get it back by any means necessary. Pollution, corruption, and kidnappings are commonplace, and most people are just trying to get by. You're not trying to save the world here, but if you are so inclined, you can do a little good for the people at the bottom. The game cuts through its grim setting by injecting a good dose of humour through most of the interactions with characters dotted around the levels. This is the kind of game where a man crouched behind a fence surrounded by rats will call you sketchy. You go into a fisherman's attic only to find a chicken who pleads for help between clucks. Characters might die at the drop of a hat. Sometimes it's played for laughs, and sometimes it's played straight. It's nonsensical and yet down to earth. No one gets a 10-minute dialogue while dying in real life. It just happens. and Gumbrella understands that. A lesson I had to learn quickly was to not get too attached to characters, as they often die in ways that you just can't prevent. No one is safe. So when you come across someone that you really like, all you can do is hope that they stay around and adjust your choices accordingly. It is truly a lesson in disempowerment, and it lends to the tone of the game immensely. It makes the choices you make feel so much more impactful. For example, I found a gem and returned it to the merchant who was looking for it. I then became paralyzed, thinking that I'd butterfly affected some horrible events into motion because I didn't give it to his rival, the rat eater who lives in the sewers. You've also got to be paying attention. A hard task for me. Sometimes conversations will move on and there's just no going back. People will remember what you've done for them and to them, and you'll never know when a good deed or mercy will come back around to help you out. Gumbrella is one of the few games that I've played recently where I felt my choices actually mattered. The game really knows how to tie the tiny details into the greater picture. The letter of a sign hanging in one chapter may have more significance in another. A small character who you thought was a throwaway will come back later on in the game. The world feels dynamic and lived in, which makes you feel attached and immersed. The story is just amazing, although it does have a few faults. Without spoiling anything, the ending felt a little bit rushed, which is a little bit of a shame. They built up this grimy, dying world, and eventually you get to view a portion of it that is pristine, but they imply that there are dark things lingering just behind the scenes, and that progress comes at a terrible cost. Then the game throws a bunch of information at you, you fight a baddie, and then a final baddie, and then the game just ends. I would have liked for it to be a little bit of a slower burn ending where all of that world building could flourish and the main story could come to fruition. The runtime for the game is about 6 hours, but it definitely could have benefited from maybe another one just to tie up the story a little bit more. Overall, the story and world building are by far Gumbrella's strongest elements. It kept me locked into the narrative with laser focus. The gameplay itself has its strengths and weaknesses. Some of its strengths are how it's introduced. As a slower learner to game mechanics typically, I felt like the tutorial was quick and easy and blunt, mainly telling you how to play the game in the form of signs outright telling you how to move and shoot with your Gumbrella. The Gumbrella itself is a joy to move around with. Once you master the movement, it becomes immensely satisfying to glide around from place to place with a simple pop of the canopy. Of course, there's also the shooting, which feels pretty good, and what an arsenal you have. Grenades, rifle ammo, and of course, your trusty buckshot, just some of the ammo types that you have available to you. You can even use recoil to gain a little extra jump height. However, while the movement and shooting are smooth, selecting ammunition and healing items did feel just a little bit clunky. The levels themselves are varied and interesting in theme, giving you the distinct feeling of being on a journey. You're transported between levels by train. One level might take you to a snowy mountain, where you have to kill a lion in a one-on-one combat in front of its cubs to assert dominance, or maybe you're in a factory where the main enemy is a never-ending slew of occupational health and safety violations. There's so much visual depth to the levels, and the pixel graphics are just stunning. The music in this game is so good. Drums kick into a military beat when talking to soldiers near the town's gate, the main theme buzzes in during moments of intrigue, and the calmness of the church's theme makes it feel like one of the few places of respite in the entire game. And of course, I will never stop bopping to the merchant's theme. Both sound and music are used in great effect in Gunbrella. All in all, the game balances its down-to-earth grittiness with whimsical bits and delightful characters in a way that enhances both. The jokes provide a reprieve from the otherwise bleak world, and the bleak world means that at any point those characters could vanish. Hero or villain, it doesn't matter. I had a really great time with this one. Alrighty, on to the next one. Wrapping up this collection of Devolver Digital recommendations with a cozy game that I played earlier this year, Teran Nil. Your goal in Teran Nil is to take a barren, toxic wasteland, restore its natural state, reintroduce animals, and then carefully unravel your work as to not leave one trace of man-made machinery behind. There are initially only 4 missions, played in order, each taking place in a different procedurally generated environment: temperate, tropical, polar, and continental. The environments require distinct techniques and equipment in order to revive, each providing a different palette of tools and structures to use. Each Genesis project is a 3-stage process, starting with the lifeless isometric canvas. You're first asked to restore the basic climate and essential greenery through placing toxin scrubbers and irrigators, and then later dredging up ocean floor to create new land. Drawing from a limited pool of money that's increased by making particularly efficient moves, if you run out, lower difficulties allow you to recycle some of your structures, while higher settings make overextending a failure state, forcing you to do a complete do-over. With enough green and blue foundation laid, a new set of structures unlocks, allowing you to further manipulate the environment and grow different kinds of habitat to fill the quota for each. Lastly, each mission asks you to scan environments that you've created for ideal homes for an assortment of animals, and then use natural rivers or your own monorail system to clean up, leaving nothing but a lush environment filled with wildlife, and then you're encouraged to sit back and appreciate for a while as the camera pans over triumphantly. Teran Nil is impressively good at conveying its message through its mechanics. Systems are introduced through a beautifully illustrated notebook, encouraging you to focus on the beauty of the natural world. While you could brute force your way to success and cover the entire map with a grid of scrubbers and irrigators, it's far more efficient just to give nature a little nudge in the right direction. A few carefully placed cloud seeders near bodies of water won't do much at first, but the rising humidity will kickstart natural rains again, cleansing the entire map if you're willing to just sit there for a while and let nature take its course while enjoying the rainy ASMR vibes. That's where the joy of Teran Nil lay for me. Just completing each mission became relatively easy, but finding the tricks in each environment to nudge nature into doing the heavy lifting was always extremely satisfying. A well-placed water pump on a hill can fill multiple rivers and lakes. A controlled wildfire can create fertile ground for the entire forest. You're kickstarting natural processes, not building a base. And perhaps learning a bit about how these environments were formed in the first place. The randomly generated maps provide their own challenges, with the placement of a natural lake or river often defining your strategy. But unpredictably, and adapting to what chance provides is part of the fun, although your toolbox is robust enough to make failure a distant concern with a little practice. While it's often possible to fudge your way through to a passing grade on most missions, getting top marks sometimes requires very specific arrangements of biomes adjacent to each other, which the map layout might not always provide. That said, it was never more than a minor obstacle, making an 100% score just a little harder. A minor blemish on what was otherwise a consistently relaxing and satisfying experience. The themes of the game are well reflected in its design. As much fun as you might be having, sometimes it's best to just clean up when you're done and move on. Not everything has to last forever or grow endlessly. Bowing out gracefully brings its own satisfaction. And with that, I believe it's time for me to bow out gracefully from this video. I hope that everyone attending PAX this weekend has an amazing time. Please look out for me. I'll be filming a lot of the weekend, and if you would like to be part of my PAX video, I'll have a few questions that I'd love to be able to ask you. Don't forget that tomorrow, Cult of the Lamb are doing a free live event in Fed Square at 8:30 p.m, where we'll all be partaking in a large ritual. There's lots going on at Fed Square this weekend, so come down for a little bit of silly fun. And to everyone else, I hope that you have an amazing weekend, and I'll see you all next week for my next video. Take care. Love ya.